And there we go. Okay, so I
Hello.
am here today um, together with our friends from the Games People, Ian. For those who don't know me, I am Dina from Dina Said So Studio. I run a marketing studio for board game publishers. So that giving you the benefits of having an in-house marketing team without actually having to hire in-house. One of the things that we're going to look at today is talking more about why we run demos and how to run better demos for conventions. So,
Yeah.
Ian, why don't you do an introduction of who you are and what you do?
Um. Yeah. Okay. I suppose I've been. I mean, I had a collection of games that I accumulated from charity shops when I was a kid, and my oldest prototype is probably about 40, 45 years old. It's still sat on a shelf. I don't suppose it'll ever be anything, but I've probably got involved in hobby games around 2005, and started designing around 2016. When
Mm.
I started designing, I began networking with publishers, and then I began demoing for them. And so I've demoed for a series of different publishers, either on my own, as part of a small, or even a large team. Um, Prior to all of that, in my sort of former life, I was a sales rep, and so doing medical sales and pharmaceutical sales. And we were basically being trained for short, frequent interactions with customers. In my case, it was GPs, so we got lots and lots of practice at the same pitch. And so I've never been terribly phased by the prospect of pitching. I tended to think in terms of turning up with a business card and a strong sense of entitlement when approaching publishers. Um, but it might, whether that's why I ended up in sales or whether it was just my personality was a natural fit. I am, I think, the classic Myers Briggs extrovert, and whether or not you still subscribe to that, I think it's probably helpful to understand why I don't struggle to make conversation, and why Dina has already said we'll have to have a safe word if I start rambling off on one for too long.
No, but that's good. So why do you think that you're a good candidate to talk with me about running good demos?
Um, I suppose first and foremost, because I haven't seen anyone else really dissect it to the point where I think that it could be. I don't think I'm necessarily, I'm certainly not the best person to do it, but I've worked on a lot of stands with a lot of demoers, recognizing that those around me, with a little bit of help and a little bit of support, could perform an awful lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's often something that's neglected. Okay, as long as we get some gamers, we'll be fine. Um, and to some extent, sort of natural enthusiasm and a sort of common cause with the customer gets you so far. But um, I just am very aware that a little bit of extra help would really help. Would help a lot of people who find themselves, yeah, I suppose they don't really know what they don't know. And I think
Exactly.
it could probably help people who are going to be demoing for a publisher maybe for the first time. And I think it will also help a publisher decide what it is they want to get out of their demo team.
I think that that sounds fantastic. Yeah. Obviously, the publishers don't know what they don't know, and for very many, the metric is that did it get me sales or did it not, and how many people did we show the game to? Which is
Yeah,
obviously, as a person who does marketing for board game publishers, very often when we take over or even rep our clients at conventions, it's very often how many demos did you do? Because we don't do sales for them at these conventions. We mostly do them with a very specific purpose of either getting email signups or just having like the exposure of getting additional content for like media outlets to picking up and stuff like that. So it's always like, how many did we do? And I remember at one convention we did with a couple of our clients, we ran 120 demos over the weekend, and that sounds absolutely insane. But then when you look at like the games that we brought with us, some of them were like 10 minutes games, and some of them were full hour games. So it's like the 120 overall says very little, because what
Yes.
sort of was that impact? And I think it's very important when we talk about, like, are you going to a convention and what do you do there? It's like, what is it that motivates you to particularly go to a specific convention? Because not all conventions are created the same. While they can all provide you with like media coverage, they are inherently very different to each other. Say, for example, Aircon seems to be great for getting the games in front of people. UK Games Expo seems to be better for us, at least, from getting signups. Essen Spiel is all about exposure and sales, but it depends on what kind of games do you have for sales as well. So I think to continue the conversation is maybe we should first sort of go these and identify all of the different reasons why you might attend a convention as a publisher.
Yes. Yes. No, absolutely. I think one of the things that's quite hard to do as a demoer is deciding when you should be cutting it short. Because you've been invested in, you're here to do demos, and so part of what you end up doing is sort of persuading someone to sit through a demo, and actually, it may sound very hard nosed, but it makes far more sense for the customer as much as for your publisher to decide, is this person a viable prospect, or are they just too polite not to want, they don't want to say no. Convincing someone to sit through a demo of a 3-hour Euro who's there with 2 6-year-olds and only plays family games is wasting both your time. And so having a good idea of, one, how to triage that customer and decide, are they a good fit? And it may well be, you talked about having a whole fleet of games, 4-hour games, 10-minute games. So that first few seconds of conversation is about deciding which of these games fits. And if we haven't got something that fits, I'll give you the basic info, but I'm not going to try and persuade you to sit through any more than that, because it's wasting both our times.
Hmm. So how do you think, as a demo person who's been rounded up from a publisher to run demos, how do you, like, what kind of clues would we be looking for? Whether or not we should provide them with a directed play, or if we should throw them a sales pitch? Like, how would you break that down?
One of the things I love doing is having to see what they've just bought. Customers are, punters, people going around a demo, going around a convention. They've just bought something. It's there in their bag. They're always happy to talk about it, and just asking them what they've bought, and and sort of complimenting them on the purchase, or saying that, oh, I don't know about that. What's it like? Or, oh yeah, I've heard great things about that game. You've immediately got something to talk about. You're both gamers. It's a very easy way to get in. But as soon as you start that conversation, you begin to start thinking, are they someone who's going to be a good fit for for the game that I'm here to present?
Hmm.
Or which of the games on the shelf behind me are the ones that I should be directing them to? Sometimes you've got a front of house person who's, perhaps maybe saying, okay, well, over here we've got the family game, over here we've got the roll and write, and over here we've got the Euro. Which one's the good fit? So that first interaction, that first few sentences, just asking them, what sort of a convention they're having. People are there to have a good time, and asking them about the good time they're having is a great way of starting to find out what sort of gamer they are.
Oh, absolutely. Like, creating that sort of common platform that you can then
Mm,
build on extra experiences and prime them for having an experience with you is obviously a great entry to any booth convention area.
yeah, yeah.
We're getting a question here is, what is the difference in how you would approach avid gamers versus casual gamers during a demo?
Ooh, okay. I guess. I mean, in one sense, you can't. I mean, when you're demoing at somewhere like Essen, you've got a very different profile. There is the vast majority are. There's a lot of gamers, but there's also a lot of people who you sort of feel have just walked off the street. They are just families who are there for a day out. And I think in terms of it very much depends on the game, but I think in terms of the sort of conversation you're going to have, I don't know that I would necessarily go into it thinking they're a gamer, therefore my conversation is going to go this way, because it is very much down to the responses that you get to the questions or the questions that they ask. So I don't think it's quite as easy to pigeonhole. Obviously, what you will find is words that you've used in your spiel in your conversation. For instance, if there's card drafting and you talk about drafting, once you get a blank look, you'll remember, not everyone knows what drafting means. Or if you say
Very
it's worker
true.
placement and they just look a bit nonplussed by that, okay, I now need to explain. And it tends to be the case that you will learn, because you've got lots of times to practice, you're going to be doing this over and over again. You realize the things that are going to come up over and over again. And I may get sick of the same joke every time, but it doesn't stop me telling it, because actually, if it got a laugh once, it'll get a laugh 50 times, even if I'm the only one laughing. I think it's very much down to the customer, and just because they're an experienced gamer doesn't necessarily change the conversation. If they may be an experienced family gamer, they may know some of the lingo, but there may equally be things that they haven't come across, and you can't assume.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether that's really answered the question. I wasn't expecting questions so soon.
Thanks to Sasha for throwing in the questions there. How do you, if you were to sort of, do you, oh, yes, okay, so do you do any sort of profiling in terms of discerning whether or not you would start off with being, approaching them as casual or avid gamers when they get closer to the booth?
I do tend to, I'm probably one of those annoying people, because I tend to try and approach people outside the booth. And it will just be to make conversation. It is in your face a little bit, but I don't think of it as hard sell. I'm just there to do a job. I'm there to engage with people. And so rather, I will engage with people who are walking past, and I'll ask them, are you having a good convention? What have you bought? What sort of things are you looking for? When I was working for one publisher, one of the questions I would ask is, would you prefer to go on a safari or make honey? And people would generally answer that, because they can't say yes or
How
no.
could you
They have to give an
not?
answer and immediately say, okay, well, here's this game. Let me tell you about it. But it's those sort of interactions, just that first contact with people, I think, is where you begin to get a feel: are they closed off or are they not?
Mm-hmm.
And people there are, in a convention trade hall, people are there to find out about new stuff. So they are an open, potentially open market, if not. If not, they might not want your game, but they're certainly open to finding out whether they want your game. And
Mm.
I think there's that those first sort of sparring, the moves where you're sort of first just feeling them out, just having, engaging in conversation. You will get a few people that will sort of, no, haven't, no time. Fine, that's fine. I don't think I've ever upset anyone by saying, hello, how's your convention going?
It's one of the things I love the most about conventions is those fleeting interactions that you never quite know where they're going to go, and they always seem to surprise me. And
Yes,
I absolutely love it because you get to connect with a lot of different people that you might not necessarily meet sort of organically through your own gaming groups or
yes,
gaming cafes. And it's such a great way to bridge sort of a connection over a game, because it's like, of course, like we're all gamers, but in the end, like how often, like say for example, my own group, we play Battlestar Galactica over and over and over again because everyone loves the game. And every time I try to pitch a game for them to play, it is that, how, like, which part of Battlestar Galactica is this similar to, so that I can make them play it with me.
Right.
So there's obviously like every groups have their preferences, and it's very easy to sort of start catering your own shelf towards those people that you tend to play with the most. And a
Yeah.
convention is such a nice way to find more people who might align more with like, I loved anything that has tiles in it. If I can place a tile, I'm a happy gamer. And there's a lot of games that we work with that obviously doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's finding that particular one piece that's just like, this is the magic of this game, and being able to present it and showing it to everyone else is something I absolutely love when it comes to conventions.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Because we all love different things in it. So when
Mm.
you get a game to demo, how do
Okay.
you like? What does that sort of process look like for you?
Um, I mean, the first thing you obviously need to play it. I mean, yeah, that's all part of the prep. Play it, try and work out what's the hook. And that's going to be in that first interaction where you actually move on to talking about one of the games, whether you're there with one game to present or whether you've got 20. You're going to start off with a 30-second pitch. It's your elevator pitch. Generally, that's about feeling the customer out. Does this sound like something you'd be interested in? Um, and it's actually something that a designer is going to need when they're talking to a publisher, or when you're talking to playtesters, or when you're talking to your game group. What's the 30-second pitch? You know, does that sound interesting enough to actually make someone want to think, okay, yeah, I want to hear more about that. So finding out what that is and that hook that makes it sound interesting, I think is the key thing, and that may be a theme, it may be the mechanic, it may be a particular component. If it's a component, you're onto a winner because you've got table presence, you've got something there that's tangible. People will see it as they walk past. But if it's something a little bit more abstract, then you have to sort of present that as quickly and as briefly as possible so that people will go, oh, yeah, okay, I could spend 5 minutes finding out about this.
Mm. Alex is saying it's found many times that he's more likely to buy or back a game if they've played it before, and burned too many times by blind purchases.
Sorry?
um, that you can obviously, if you haven't played the game before, you can sort of quite easily be burned by blind purchases
Oh,
because you don't
absolutely.
necessarily know
Yes.
what you're getting.
Yes. No, absolutely. I think we all as gamers go through the phase of, wow, this is hobby. All games are great. Buy loads of games, loads more, loads more, loads more. And then we start slowing down and realizing that actually a lot of the stuff we bought isn't quite as good as we thought it was when we were first sort of caught up with the enthusiasm. And then I think for a lot of us, our purchasing slows down.
It's
And then
true.
it becomes,
Yeah.
and then, this, you can have a very hard-nosed approach. When you start focusing on sales and sales technique, then you can have a very hard-nosed approach, and it makes us seem like we're just, capitalists wanting to maximize profit. But in reality, it's about selling the right product or the right game or the right enjoyment to the right customer, to the right person. We want
Mm,
them to enjoy our games. We don't want them to take our game home and not enjoy it. Um,
exactly.
and so, one of the things we talked about earlier, Dina, was what makes a good demo. What is a good experience for the customer and for the publisher. To some extent, it's when both are satisfied. And obviously, the publisher is trying to find the people that will enjoy their game. They'd much rather sell to a satisfied customer than to a dissatisfied customer. But we need to do a little bit of work because sometimes we know better. We may not always be right, but sometimes we can feel out and say, actually, I think you will enjoy this one. And so
Mm,
doing but a lot of this is about how do you decide whether the customer's right for your game as much as it is about persuasion. I'm not a
exactly.
big believer. I don't know whether you have what's it called? The Apprentice in Finland. The reality TV show.
I've heard of it.
Basically,
I've not watched
yeah.
any of it.
Whenever they talk about sales in The Apprentice, they talk about someone who just never stops talking. Oops.
Hmm.
Um, and
Was that a
never,
self-qualifier?
yeah, never stops talking, and will just browbeat someone. Say, "Oh, give me £5 off, give me £6 off, give me £7 off," and that is someone who's good at sales, and that absolutely isn't the case. A good sales interaction is one where both are walk away happy. You
Mm,
don't want to persuade someone to buy a game that isn't a good fit for them.
exactly. Obviously, in order to get a good ranking on BGG scores and good reviews, you need people, the right kind of people for your particular game who can get the
I'd
right
never thought of
sort of
that.
enjoyment and
Yeah.
to buy the game. So if your pitch is wrong, and people buy it based on that pitch, and that pitch isn't the best pitch for your game, you end up getting lower scores because people are like, this didn't deliver what you promised. And they can sort of
Mm.
feel that, like, why did you lie to me? Sort of,
Yes.
oh, now I'm cross with you because you sold me a bad game.
I never thought of that. Is there a sort of phase in the first launch of a game where you will actually be even more deliberate about who you want it to go to?
Obviously, so like one of the processes that we do with the companies after we've played a game is looking at like what is the self-qualifying parts of the game. Who do we want to play this? Who are we most likely to get a very high score out of by exposing them to the particular game? So when we, for example, work with influencers, we have a profile on all of the influencers we worked with based on the games that they thoroughly enjoy and the mechanisms and the themes. And then we pitch it to them with that in mind so that we make it as easy for them to reject us as possible because
Right.
we want
Yes.
them to love it. So if we can give them
Yes.
the worst pitch and they still think it's interesting,
That's the solution. Bad pitching at conventions.
so we know that they actually, that they took the time to actually look at it. We know that those people tend to be the ones that are like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest game ever. Best 22 game, top 10 lists is when we've not done the best job at pitching it because obviously the sensitivity to a pitch when you're doing it at a demo is, do I want to spend minutes on it now? It needs to be good. It needs to have, it needs to capture you. But when it comes to like influencers, it has to be, you start off sort of they want to reject you, so you want to give them all the chances they have to reject the game, so that they are not
Yes.
getting a bad experience because they're only going to pay it once, before they
Yeah.
get that review, and we need that one to be perfect.
Yeah. I think with influencers, obviously, you've got a very small pool. I mean, it's a big pool of influencers, but in the greater scheme of things, it's very small.
Mm,
Whereas actually, when you let a customer, a punter walk past you in a convention, there's three more right behind them.
exactly.
Um, and
Yeah.
so letting someone who probably isn't a good fit just walk on by you don't need to feel like you failed.
Yeah.
You actually are probably making a wise choice.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to be much more willing to let go of the people who probably weren't. Yeah.
Mm.
As Alex is saying, it's a fail faster approach.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Well,
Definitely.
that's the great thing about it. I mean, it does come. I talked about frequent interactions. When you are doing the same pitch over and over again, it's great for iteration. Play test it.
Mm,
Use that pitch, use that line. When you make the choice of which part of the game you're going to show, or which cards, or which hidden objectives, or whatever, you actually can try it out and say, actually, that didn't work quite so well. Oh, I'll do it different next time.
and if you do like that 50 times during a weekend, you get really good at pitching
Yes,
that particular game.
yes. I think if you're deliberate about it, as I say, if you just go in with that mindset that actually I am going to make it better. I've seen people do exactly the same demo on Friday at 10 o'clock as they do it on Sunday at 4. And that's yeah, they don't need to do that.
Not necessarily the best way.
Mm.
So if we then try to sort of loop back to where we started, for
Yes.
those who kind of sort of joined late, we started with what are some of the reasons that publishers may go to conventions? And
Okay.
I know that you have a list.
Well, I think the list is more your list. The list I have is in terms of what is the the list I have is in terms of the sort of interaction I will have with a customer.
Mm-hmm.
What am I expecting to get out of that interaction? So, in a sense, what the publisher, what is a successful interaction for a publisher? So for instance, if they don't have a game to sell and they are just collecting, raising awareness, raising interest, collecting email addresses, then you don't really need to play through a long game. If it's a 10-minute game, then maybe you'll get, you can play a 10-minute game anyway. But if it's a 3-hour Euro, you're not going to sit people down for 3 hours to play that, because actually what you want to do is get them interested, give them enough of a taster that they will say, yeah, here's my email address. Whereas if you're actually trying to make that sale, you actually want players to get a feel for playing the game.
Mm.
And so, it may still be, you're not going to spend 3 hours doing that. But what you want to do is hit those high points, have players making decisions, and actually, feel like, I think you want to create the situation where they're invested in the game just as you take it away from them and say, okay, that's the end of the demo. And they'll think, oh, but I want to know what happens next.
I want
Okay,
more.
now I was enjoying that. I want to know how it's going to end. Okay, so then they're actually potentially set up for, oh, who are you going to play this with? Would you like to, would you like to take this? Would you like to take the base game, or do you want to take the playmat as well?
Yeah.
So part of it comes down to what's the life cycle of the product in terms of, or the pipeline, where is it in the pipeline? What is it that's available? And that'll determine what sort of demo you're going to be doing.
Because you mentioned earlier when in our exchange, directed play.
Yes.
How does
Okay.
this
So
difference from demoing? The way you see
okay.
it.
Right. So I mean, we've talked about. Let's take me through it. Let's take you through it. Okay. So we started with that 30-second pitch, the elevator pitch. Literally, you could do it in an elevator. You've got 30 seconds as they walk past. They may not even have to stop to actually say, no, that's not for us. Or they may just pause long enough to then go on to the next thing where you're going to actually explain a little bit more about the game. This is going to take you 2 or 3 minutes. And this is your chance to triage. Do I want this customer to spend any more time with me than this next 3 minutes? And that's where you're trying to find out what sort of gamer they are, what sort of games they enjoy playing, and present the game in that context. As I say, we're not trying to convince them that this 3-hour Euro is a light, fun family game. What we're trying to do is find out if it's a good fit. So by the end of that 3 minutes, both the customer and the demoer can sort of make an informed decision of whether or not this is a good fit for them, and whether or not they, you want to lead them through into the next step. If you do, and the sort of things you're going to include are that, we're all familiar with the first 3 sentences. Who are you? What are you doing? How do you win? But also, what do your turns look like? What mechanics are used? Is this an engine builder? Is it a worker placement? Are you drafting? What are the cool things that happen? What are the high points of the game? The best bit is when this happens. And if their eyes have lit up, then you might actually move them on to a little bit more of a, what I would then consider to be a demo. So a demonstration, 5 to 10 minutes, they've already bought in. They're already committed to finding out more. And then what you're trying to do is give them enough information to actually make a buying decision. Now, it may well be that that's all you're going to offer. I think there's a difference between, we'll come to directed play in a moment, but there's a difference between a demo where essentially I'm doing most of the stuff. I'm showing them the cool things that can happen. I'm telling them what happens when this reaches here, or what happens if Fred decides he doesn't like Bill and this is going to happen. I'm giving them the high points. And if you're just collecting, email addresses, as I say, that's probably sufficient. I don't need to give players any more than that. They're not really going to remember much more of the experience in 6 months when they're, or a year's time. But if I've got something that's more than that, if I've actually got the game there and available to buy, then I may actually, rather than doing a 5 or 10 minute explanation, possibly with a group of people stood around looking at me all at once, I may actually sit 4 players down at a turn and then take them through what I would call directed play. And I think the difference there is players are actually doing the same actions they would be doing, making the same choices they would be making during the game, but they're probably not fully informed, and they're not really thinking about. They're probably not making decisions on turn 1 that they fully understand the consequences of. It's not uncommon to see videos of how to teach a game. All of the pros. So you think about Shut Up and Sit Down did something similar. I know Rodney Smith's done something similar. Paul Grogan's done something similar. All the pros talk about getting people to learn while they're doing. So we're not going to sit and talk to them for 30 minutes and then expect them to remember the things I told them 25 minutes ago. What we're going to do is set them up. Turn 1, you need to do this, and explain why you're doing it this way. Reassure people that they won't be able to make a mistake. A lot of the time, people are very uncomfortable with making a move or taking a turn when they don't fully understand everything about it and fully understand the consequences.
It can
But
be
if
quite scary, yeah. Like, oh, I'm
sorry,
gonna mess up the rest of my game now if I make this move. How do I?
well, exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing I normally say to people there is, don't worry, we can always do a reset. Now, obviously, in a convention setting, you're not actually intending to play the game to completion anyway, in the vast majority of cases. And so, in a sense, it doesn't really matter. So what I want to do is give you a feel for the sort of decisions you're going to be making. We're not really worried about who's winning or losing here. And I'm not going to let you make any silly mistakes. What I'm going to do is help you and your partner to actually experience the game and the interactions that this game is going to offer to you. And so with a directed play that maybe takes about 20 minutes, what you're going to do is help people to have to basically start on turn 1 learning how it works. And although I've called it turn 1, you might not actually play turn 1, because one of the great things to do with something like that is to actually set the game up so that the boring bit at the beginning, the bit that always looks very similar, so that that's actually missed out, and we're diving straight in with all of the actions available. We've talked about card drafting. Don't ever expect a customer to do drafting if they've never played the game before. It's just nonsense. They won't have a clue. They don't have the information upon which to base that drafting decision, that choice of which card do I need to keep, which do I need to let go. So give them a set of cards and say, well, we'd normally have, the game would normally allow you to draft these. Here's a good starting set. Here you go, here you go. And that way you can make sure that the cards that they need to do something interesting on turn 1 and turn 2 are going to be available to them. It's not going to be possible for them to end up with cards that are too expensive, that they can't purchase them, or all the cards in one suit and not cards in another suit. So you want to make sure that actually turn 1 and turn 2, you know what they're going to be able to do. And actually, because you've stacked the deck and you've probably done this 3, 5, 10, 15, 25 times, actually you soon get a feel for, okay, yep, so player 1, now you're going to do this. Player 2, you're going to do this. And actually, what I find is that within a turn or two, people do intuitively now understand how to play, and they haven't had to listen to you for 30 minutes explaining stuff that they then have to try and remember. I know I'm expressing a preference here, because I know some people do prefer to hear about a game that way. But I know that there's a lot of people on the neurodivergent spectrum within the gaming community And a lot of us will really struggle to take in that information until we see something happening, until we can use that information ourselves. And I haven't actually found anyone who prefers to have the information delivered as a monologue actually say they can't take the information in. They are a bit uncomfortable not having it all at the beginning, but they are going to get this information at the same rate as everyone else at the table.
Mm.
And so, what I tend to do with, as a directed player, as I say, is to make sure that the fun stuff's going to happen and have some idea of where you're going to reach a point of completion. It might be at the end of round one because there's 3 rounds in the game. It might be when every player has managed to build a building. There's all sorts of things that that you might choose as a suitable point to say, you've now achieved that, and that's where we're going to finish that's where we're going to finish this demo. I mean, I wouldn't call it directed play to a customer, but that's where we're going to finish the demo because there's a lot of people who want to see this game.
It's
Hope we've
quite,
given you
yeah. It's
enough
quite,
information to sort of understand it.
it's quite similar to how in the RPG space they call it railroading, which you
Yes,
probably would use in the board games as well. You're
yes,
not actually just pushing them through with a set choice, but you're giving them some choices along the way. But
yeah.
this is the red line and through the game of the story that I want to tell, and show you in order to pitch it the best, so you get a good feel for the game. We had a question here. When you're starting sort of in the middle of the game, do you
Yep.
tell a story of like how the game began to give them a feel of where in this narrative that they are?
I guess it depends how strong the narrative is. Um, a lot of Euros don't have a huge amount of narrative. You just need to start with some resources and a couple of cards, because otherwise the first turns, often not all actions are available on turn one because you don't have the resources able to do them. So then turn one is a bit boring and tedious because everyone just has to go and collect resources. So starting with those resources, you can just say, okay, well, we're going to start on somewhere equivalent to turn two, or turn three, because it just speeds up the intro of the game and saves us doing saves us doing, I don't want to say boring, but it just gets us into the action quicker. I think I'm trying. I don't think I've done well. No, Fog of Love is one that I have demoed. That's very strongly narrative,
Yes.
um, but that one also does tend to, um, in a sense, the game itself takes you through that process, and so I don't think it wasn't really a case of, okay, we're going to miss out the beginning. And part of that game, the whole setup and creating the character is part of the fun. And so, although I would try and encourage players through the process so that we could get through it quickly, I also recognize that actually their setup was part of the process. It's, for those who don't know Fog of Love, it's a sort of half role play, half board game where players are playing couples in a car crash relationship. And the role play element of choosing your character and choosing what their characteristics are is all part of that process. And so, in a sense, we tend to do that every time, whereas
Mm-hmm.
other games where it's more, okay, I just need some of this in order to be able to do anything. Okay, well, here you go, start with it, um, just so that all the actions are available.
Yeah,
And
because
you can give players choices. You can say to them, well, you've got a choice here. You could either use that for this, or you could use it for that. What do you want to do? And you may then start pointing them towards, you've given them a final objective or scoring card and say, well, actually, if you do this, if you make this choice, that's going to help you complete that objective. If you do that, then that's going to help you beat your opponent who's trying to get this. So you start giving them some prompts and saying, this may help you with a particular strategy. But which strategy you now want to choose is up to you.
I think also Focus Love is a good example because it's like it's a touch semi co-op, but there is technically an opponent, and everyone has these hidden objectives as to like how they want the relationship to end. And
Oh,
I
it's
think
brilliant.
like
Yes.
choosing that in conjunction with your character makes the game interesting. And it's
Yes.
like it's sort of couples therapy, but also it's a role playing game that is a board game. It's a
I would
very interesting
always
space.
the thing with Fog of Love is if you were demoing, if two couples would turn up, I would always put the the I would pair them not as couples.
Yes. I think you'd have to be
The
very careful
demo,
with that game.
yeah, the demo with two friends who actually aren't deeply invested and haven't had that trip to IKEA or that conversation with the in-laws is a very different experience to the one where actually I just need to give you a little space.
Yeah.
But it does highlight the difference, in terms of sizing up the players who are about to sit down and deciding what sort of players they are and what relationship they have, whether or
Hmm.
not you should be, for instance, do they strike me as being players who are going to be about backstabbing each other, or are they players who actually prefer the semi-co-op elements or the cooperative elements? And part of that is, which game are you going to choose for them?
Yeah.
You know, um,
Let's make
yeah,
sure none of them are getting the aiming for what is it? It Fog of Love. It's like eternal love or something.
yes,
Just make sure none of them have that as an option, because I
right,
think if you have that one, you're kind of ruining any demo experience.
yes,
Because it can
yeah.
get, yeah, as Alex is saying, also the magic circle can get quite leaky sometimes.
Yeah, as I say, I would walk away. If it was a couple playing, I would often just walk away and say, "Call me over if you need me to. If you need me." Whereas if it's actually a spectator sport, watching two people who aren't invested in the relationship, and it is just a role play. Actually, it just becomes hilarious to watch it.
It really does. I remember I was invited on a date where playing Fog of Love was like the game that we were gonna play, and I was like, "Oh, I am not so sure." Like, are you sure? Have you like looked at the game before? And they were like, "Oh, just got it," and I'm like, I know it has love in this title, but maybe that's not a date game."
Yes, certainly not a first date game. Well, I mean, it may but we should ask you what was the result.
It was an absolute fucking car crash.
So probably it saved you an awful lot of work.
It definitely did.
It's about triaging triaging the customer and deciding what sort of game are we going to be playing.
Yes, and what kind of gamers are approaching the table, I think, is also an important part of that.
Yeah,
But it's definitely a bold move, for sure.
yeah.
Um, yeah, we had another
I,
question here. We said, like, what is the most difficult game that you've ever demoed? Would Fog of Love qualify, or has there been any more challenging ones?
um, Fog of Love was fun because it was such a unique experience. I haven't demoed or played any game that was quite like it. I think harder games are games like I did some work for Renegade, so demoed Architects. I could do a four-player, directed play of Architects in 20 minutes. Um, Paladins was a little bit harder, I think,
Mm.
because it was a bit more of a solo, not what's solitaire, not a solitaire experience, but a little bit more of that. There wasn't a lot of interaction, so players were really just doing their own thing. So I didn't find quite the rhythm with the demos of Paladins that I managed to get into with Architects. I think it's just a bit thinkier, and I think the thinkier ones, no matter with Architects, so Architects of the West Kingdom. Is it Paladins of the West Kingdom? I can't see myself from here. Um, the both of them worker placement. With Architects, there was a nice trajectory of I'll start you with these cards. This is where you go to get resources. On your next turn, if you go there again, you'll get more resources. Now you can build this card. Now you can do that. And so it actually, over the space of sort of 4 or 5 turns in 20 minutes, actually you could do quite a lot. Whereas with paladins, I think the payoff comes a bit later. And so it's a little harder to give players a satisfying experience during that first, few turns. I seem to remember what we were doing was we would play the first 2 or 3 scoring objectives, because with paladins the scoring objectives sort of come out, but you don't actually, if I remember correctly, you don't actually complete them. You just know they're going to be scored. It's a long time ago, but I have a feeling you just find out, so that the scoring objectives that are worth more come up later, so you don't have as much time to prepare. But so you can see that they're going to score, but actually you're not really getting to that denouement. So I think that's probably the harder games, where the payoff and the scoring all happens at the end, because it's very hard to. It's hard. You've just moved along a track. You haven't really done anything. You haven't really achieved anything.
It can be
So
difficult to
it
get
makes it.
that
Yeah.
feeling of like, oh my gosh, this game is amazing, because you don't really get the payoff in either a
Yes.
directed play or a demo.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
What are some of the common pitfalls when people are demoing or directing playing for you that you've seen at conventions?
So what are the
Common sort of pitfalls that you've noticed when you've been walking around on the convention halls?
Well, first of all, you get people who really are just going to play the game, and they're not, they're not demoers. They're just gamers, and they're just inviting you to join them at the table and play the game with them. And that's not their fault. I think it's just, for some people it comes more naturally than others. I think, first of all, who you get to sit down, you haven't won by getting everyone to sit down. You want to try and triage the customer and decide whether it's worth it. I saw a game at Essen, which, there was only one copy of the game at the show, and their demos were taking an hour and a half, 30 minutes each, and then an hour of play. So best will in the world, they were going to see 20 people experience that game each day, with 80,000 people in the room.
Ooh, that's awful. At that point, I would
well, it's just a wasted opportunity.
It really is.
But part of that is knowing what that can then comes down to the publisher. What are we trying to get out of this?
Yeah.
Is it really important that people experience the game, or do we just need them to remember it when it's going to hit Kickstarter next year? And so knowing what your publisher wants is the first step towards being able to deliver that. And if the publisher doesn't know or hasn't expressed it to you, ask them, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Are we after names? Are we after email addresses? Are we after sales? What are we just raising awareness? Because you need to know what it is that you're going for. I think the other thing is make sure you have throat lozenges, because talking at slightly elevated volumes, non-stop, for 8 hours will really hammer your voice by the end of day 2 or 3. But keeping that enthusiasm, this may be the 16th time you've done this demo, but actually for the person who's experiencing it for the first time, they want to feel that this is going to be fun. They want to feel that it's going to be exciting. And you need to convey that with your demeanor and your the way and your tone of voice and just excitement level, enthusiasm. And yeah, it will turn a few people off, but on the whole, people respond well to someone who's just happy to see them and cheerful and enthusiastic. And so trying to keep that, and obviously, again, I've already said something like that, so the big difference for the Myers-Briggs, which is one way of looking at personalities, the extrovert introvert dichotomy is based around where you get your energy. And at the end of a day at a convention, I am higher, more enthusiastic, more excited, more, on a, just on a high. Whereas for an introvert, at the end of the day, they may have done exactly the same job and done it just as well, but it has cost them. And they will be physically and mentally drained because actually that doesn't come naturally to them. Now, as a
Mm.
publisher, immediately I would be thinking, you know what? It's going to be easier if I find extroverts to do my demoing. But we don't always have the privilege of doing that. And there's plenty of publishers who are introverts. So they will always struggle to actually deliver that same level of enthusiasm. But I would certainly recommend publishers look for at least one or two people to be that sort of front of house, that bubbly person who is just going to, always just be on the up, and just be that smiley face and just isn't going to get tired,
Exactly. I mean,
even if their voice is worn out.
right. Very often when I'm at conventions, I will always visit all of the publishers that we're working with, so that they will, at least for a short moment, have a very bubbly personality sort of being at their booth. So it'll be very excited, since
Yes.
I know that a lot of the people I work with will be absolutely exhausted and they will be tired, probably a bit grumpy, haven't eaten lunch yet, and they just need a reminder to like be kind to yourself, have lunch, go drink some water, don't drink
Yes.
coffee the whole day,
Yes.
and
No,
sort of
that.
pepping them up a bit for like the last couple of hours. Be like, you just need to
Yeah.
do this for 2 more hours. You can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most publishers now are pretty good at having some water on the on the stand and things like that. So they just have some have those sort of things there. Throat lozenges less common. It's amazing how, it's a great icebreaker. If you meet someone who's been working as hard as you have, and you can just offer them a lozenge, they're like, oh, thank you.
Actually, yeah, I needed a human moment for my throat here.
Yes. I'm just thinking of the other stuff. So I suppose the other thing would be, and rather than thinking of specific examples, knowing when to call it. There are times where you've either they're just not enjoying it. It's not a good fit for them. There's no point pushing it through. Don't you don't want to hold a customer there longer than they want to be there. And I think particularly if there's say a 4-player game, if you can sit 4 players down but be able to sit in for someone who needs to leave,
Yeah.
that's probably helpful, as opposed to always being one of those players. And particularly, player count's another good feature. Unless the game plays best at 4, if you can avoid being part of it, then the game's probably going to go a little bit quicker, as long as it's as long as the experience with 3 is a good one. And I think the final thing is remembering the close. Now, this is where we get into sales speak. Ultimately, if we have games to sell, we would like to be able to sell those games to the customer. And often, we just don't ask. Would you like to buy it? And asking is one thing. Just reminding them that it's for sale and how much it is a very soft sell thing that we can do. We can say, the game's over there. There's a playmat as well if you want that. It's going to cost you €30. But what you can actually do is have conversations while playing, saying, so find out who they play with, find out what sort of game group they play with, and then ask at some point, so could you imagine this? Is this the sort of game that you would play, that your game group would enjoy? There's one of the things I always catch myself with, and sometimes it's really hard to avoid, is the whole closed question, open question. The theory being that if you ask a question which can be answered yes or no, it's closed. The conversation can then finish immediately. But in the context of a conversation, you probably don't need to overthink it too much. It's still great if you can keep it open. One of those things that you can always get better at. And remember, okay, don't ask, could you see yourself playing this with your game group? Because the answer is either yes or no. But which of the players in your game group would most enjoy this? Personalize it. Give them a thing, that then forces them to think, actually, there isn't anyone, or actually, Rob would really enjoy this. And then you're giving them a reason to think about purchasing. So remembering that that close doesn't have to be a hard sell in order to actually take the customer a little bit closer towards making that buying decision. And just reminding them that the game is for sale. And if it's not for sale, please give us your name so that we can put you on the Kickstarter list or whatever.
Make sure also like having a tablet or a laptop where they can, put in that email right away can be useful.
Yeah.
Instead of like giving them a QR code to read and only having like one option for connection afterwards, like be business card or a flyer. Very often it's just like giving them the active option of you can sign up now. Here's a device to do it on. You don't have to pull out
Yes.
your own phone, get distracted, realize that someone else who's on the convention is now going to lunch and wants you to come with them, in which case you've already lost.
Yes. And I know from bitter experience, don't trust anyone's handwriting.
That too.
I've collected 50 emails, of which 20 of them were illegible. And you think, oh, what a complete waste of time that was. So either have them type something in or actually write it down yourself, because you will not be able to read. You think, you will be able to, but actually you won't be able to read people's email if they write it down for themselves. So collecting it
Exactly.
electronically makes far more sense, or just saying, if you would like me to keep you informed, just give me your email address, and I will, and we'll put you on the mailing list.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex is saying here that he hears that from the expectation from the Essen crowd is very often that they get to play a full game.
That's their expectation. Doesn't mean to say it has to be fulfilled. You're right. I think there is that, and I think that's because the difference between somewhere like Essen and Games Expo, UK Games Expo, is there is a huge amount of open play area at UK Games Expo. Realistically, expecting people to sit down and play a longer Euro is not feasible. And some people may have that expectation. I think maybe that the thing that helps there is by giving them a sense of conclusion, making sure at the beginning you know where you're going to finish, telling them we're only going to play up to the end of round 2, or we're going to play until one player has invaded 6 territories, and then we're going to call it, because then they have a sense of we've reached the end. But I mean, whatever the expectation is, it doesn't have to be fulfilled. Now, obviously, if you're getting all the buying signals, are they more likely to buy because they've sat for another 30 minutes? I don't know. Make a
Very
call,
much
and then
not
if
the
you made the
case.
wrong
Yeah,
call, do it differently next time.
exactly. I think the only times I would really consider the couple of hours of like playthroughs at convention is when it is a very high price point.
Yes.
So if it is a game that will have them sort of starting a set that is going to cost them, by the end of they've gotten everything, and you want to give them the best possible feel for the whole thing, so that you're getting that 100+ sales, then I would probably be more open to consider making sure that there's enough space for full playthroughs, rather than here's the best case scenario, go play a couple of rounds, get a good feel for it, get out so I can
Yeah.
show it to someone else.
Yeah, I think that also comes down to if you've got some of the big publishers may have 30 demo tables, and they probably don't have 30 staff. So if you're not working on a one-to-one basis, then actually you can send customers away and they can play to completion. But the cost of having one of your demo staff engaged with that one customer for that long is not insignificant. And it's probably, even if you make the sale ultimately is is far less significant than the 3 other demos that could have been done in the same period.
Exactly.
Potentially, anyway.
think that was great. Is there anything else that you would add in terms of ensuring good demos at conventions as like
Um,
final
I
tips?
think the team culture is something which you can really work on. Generally you've probably got gamers, so gamify your demoing.
Mm.
Having sales targets makes us sound hard nosed and bitter and cynical, but actually having targets that are a little bit fun um, actually just makes it enjoyable. Especially if you can collectively, as a team, say, I managed to close on this, I managed to use this particular close on such and such, or I managed to do 3 demos of this in the space of an hour, or there's all sorts of little achievements, demo is bingo that you could cook up that would just make it more fun and then help. I know how easy it is to fall into the rut of just doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And what you want to do is keep it interesting for your team, keep it fun, and encourage us to be self reflective. How could I have done that differently? Not always better, but how could I have done that differently? And so if you want to, if you start off with a list of 6 different um, openings or pitches and say, okay, I want you to try and use all 6 of them. Once you've used all 6, you'll get a feel for which ones come naturally and which ones you enjoy. But just having the little things like that as a publisher with your team can just make it fun.
Hmm.
Um, and just help us remember the good habits.
Yeah,
Um,
especially on day 2 and day 3.
yes,
I think as we get deeper into conventions, it can sort of slip a little. And not
yes,
everyone is built for consistency in terms of the delivery of their demos as well. Is that, energy gets quite low on late Saturdays and early Sundays. Last question that we're going to do for the stream today is, what do you think is the difference it makes for a publisher if they have a good demo team versus, like, say, an okay demo team?
I think that's probably one of the hardest questions to answer because you you can't really test the counterfactual. Um, it's very hard to know what the result would have been had we trained our staff or had we had someone better doing this demo or that demo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it makes sense. I mean, all a publisher will ever really be able to do at the end of a demo, and the fact that conventions, you go in with an expectation, and people are consistently surprised. Think about Essen. How busy Thursday was, and how quiet I think Saturday was in comparison. Everyone was surprised at that. And so anything that we had gone in thinking, okay, well, we're going to smash our sales target on Saturday, it just didn't happen across the board. And so it's really hard to know whether anything that you've done has actually done it better.
Mm.
But I think you can get a feel for whether you're enjoying yourself and whether or not it's fun and whether or not you're sending people away with a smile on their face. And sometimes I don't think you can do any more than that.
Because obviously, yeah, the difference here is going to be like, what is actual quantifiable? Because you can't A/B test these things. It will have to be,
Yeah,
a completely different convention. It's going to have slightly different crowds.
exactly.
It's going to feel a little bit different because everything is, they are all variables that are impacting.
I mean, I do know that when I've demoed, my table is very rarely empty on a
Mhm.
stand where other people are standing around expecting customers to come up and sort of force themselves in. But that's because I'm trying hard outside the stand. I'm engaging people as they walk past. So I know that I will deliver more demos if I engage people rather than wait for people.
Yeah.
So I mean that is sort of quantified, but even that is qualitative data because, in a sense, there wasn't a time where I didn't do that. But you can see that if you've got multiple tables, most of the stands I've worked on don't have too many. But where you have got multiple tables, you can see that some people are just better at encouraging people to sit down. So I suppose there
Absolutely.
is that. In terms of whether or not a good demo is, in terms of pounds, shillings, and pence, is better than a bad demo. I think we all know the experience we've had of being taught a game badly, and
Mm.
how much that will shade our opinion of the game.
Mm.
And so if we are better at making it fun and better at explaining it clearly, giving clear expectations, and as I say, sending people away with a smile on their face, even if they don't buy it, if they've enjoyed the process, they've had a positive interaction with your company,
Yeah.
and I think that's probably the most you can hope for.
Absolutely. And building network is, a big part of being a publisher in the indie scene as well, especially in board games, since games are inherently, a social event.
Absolutely.
And just people having positive experiences with any label really means that they're more likely in the future, if it is a good fit for them and it's the right game, that they will pick it up because of those previously good experiences.
Yes. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ian, for your time today. We're
My
obviously
pleasure.
going to, share this on YouTube and everything later on, as we sort of continue to dig more into what we can sort of help publishers do in terms of being better at conventions, especially since we are starting convention season just next week. For some, at least. They start popping up and people start preparing for aircon and whatnot all over the place here. In the meantime, for people who want to talk to you specifically about demoing for them, how do they best find you?
Um, Ian Brocklebank. I'm not difficult to find. There's not very many of us. There's a few, but yeah. Or Ian at thegamespeople.co.uk. Is the other. Generally, if you find you've got mutual friends with me, you're probably, if you're in the game community, you'll probably find we've got mutual friends on Facebook. So that's probably the easiest way to first make a connection.
Absolutely.
I run virtual playtesting along with others. So virtual playtesting is an online playtesting platform, and you can also find me there, and find
Great.
virtual playtesting on Facebook as well.
Yeah. For those who are not familiar with me, I am Dina and I was your host today. I run Dina Said So Studio, where we help board game publishers and game designers prepare their campaigns and their games for launch, be it retail or crowdfunding. Most of the games that you see in my frame here are games that we've worked with through my company. And if you want to find us, we are at Dina Said So on Twitter and all of the other social medias, as well as dinasaidsostudio.com if you want to book us for a meeting to learn more about what we do. With that, I will thank chat for joining and Twitch, and have a wonderful day.
Goodbye.
Bye.